You finished the project. You checked it 3 times. You stayed up until 2 a.m. fixing things nobody else would notice. And when you finally submitted it, the first thing you thought was not relief. It was everything that could still be wrong. If that sounds familiar, you are not a high achiever. According to research published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology by Hewitt and Flett in 1991, you may be a perfectionist. And perfectionism is not a strength. It is a psychological trap that has been quietly running your life since childhood. This is what it is doing to your brain. And this is how to get out. Most people think perfectionism means having high standards. It does not. Psychologist Paul Hewitt at the University of British Columbia spent 3 decades studying perfectionism and published his findings in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 1991. He found that perfectionism is not about the quality of your work. It is about your relationship with your own worth. A person with high standards finishes a task, evaluates it objectively, and moves on. A perfectionist finishes a task and immediately asks one question: is this good enough for people to still accept me? Hewitt identified 3 types of perfectionism. The first is self-oriented perfectionism. You set impossibly high standards for yourself and feel crushing shame when you fall short. The second is other-oriented perfectionism. You set impossibly high standards for the people around you and feel contempt when they fail to meet them. The third is socially prescribed perfectionism. You believe the world around you demands perfection from you, and that any failure will result in rejection or abandonment. Research consistently shows that socially prescribed perfectionism is the most psychologically damaging of the 3, and it has been rising sharply in the United States since 1989, according to a study by Curran and Hill, published in Psychological Bulletin in 2019. Perfectionism does not appear from nowhere. A landmark study found that perfectionism is almost always rooted in early childhood experiences. 3 family environments consistently produce perfectionists. The first is conditional love. When a child receives warmth, approval, and affection only when they perform well, their developing brain learns one thing: my worth is not guaranteed. It must be earned. The second is critical parenting. When a parent consistently points out what could be better, what was missed, what fell short, the child internalizes that critical voice. They become their own harshest critic. And that voice does not go away when they leave home. It follows them into every meeting, every relationship, every creative project for the rest of their life. The third is high-achieving environments. When a child grows up surrounded by constant comparison to siblings, classmates, or cultural expectations of success, they learn to measure their value against others. Research by Curran and Hill found that young Americans today report significantly higher levels of perfectionism than previous generations, driven largely by social comparison, amplified by social media. The child who was never enough becomes the adult who can never rest. Perfectionism feels like motivation. It feels like drive. It feels like the thing that makes you better than average. But research tells a different story. A comprehensive meta-analysis by Limburg, Watson, Hager, and Egan, published in Clinical Psychology Review in 2017, examined 284 studies on perfectionism and mental health. Their findings were unambiguous. Perfectionism is strongly associated with depression, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, eating disorders, and chronic burnout. And here is why. The perfectionist brain operates in a state of permanent threat detection. Neuroscientist Martin Antony at Ryerson University found that perfectionists show elevated activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, when evaluating their own performance. In other words, the perfectionist is not experiencing the satisfaction of doing good work. They are experiencing the terror of potential failure. Every task becomes a test of worth. Every mistake becomes evidence of fundamental inadequacy. Psychologist Gordon Flett at York University found another devastating consequence. perfectionists are significantly more likely to engage in procrastination, not because they are lazy, but because starting something means risking the proof that you are not good enough. The project that is never started can never fail, and the project that is never finished can never be judged.
Thomas Curran at the London School of Economics analyzed data from 41,641 American, Canadian, and British college students collected between 1989 and 2016. His findings, published in Psychological Bulletin in 2019, revealed something alarming. Perfectionism among young Americans had increased by 33% over that period. Socially prescribed perfectionism, the belief that others demand perfection from you, had increased by 48%. Curran connected this rise directly to three forces specific to modern American culture. The first is meritocracy. The American belief that success is purely the result of effort and talent places the entire burden of outcomes on the individual. If you fail, you have only yourself to blame. This creates a culture where imperfection is not just a mistake, it is a moral failure. The second is social media comparison. Platforms designed to display curated highlight reels of other people's lives create a permanent comparison environment that perfectionism feeds on. The third is economic insecurity. Research shows that perfectionism increases in environments of perceived scarcity and competition. When the stakes feel existentially high, the pressure to be perfect becomes existentially urgent. America in 2024 is producing more perfectionists than any previous generation in its history, and it is making them sicker.
So, what is actually happening in the perfectionist mind? Three mechanisms documented extensively in peer-reviewed research. The first is all-or-nothing thinking, extensively studied by Aaron Beck at the University of Pennsylvania and documented in Cognitive Therapy and Research. The perfectionist brain does not register partial success. 99% right feels identical to completely wrong. A single flaw contaminates the entire achievement. The second mechanism is what psychologists call the arrival fallacy, documented by positive psychology researcher Tal Ben-Shahar at Harvard. The perfectionist believes that completing the next goal at the right standard will finally deliver the feeling of being enough. It never does, because the standard always rises to sting just out of reach. The third mechanism is self-worth contingency, studied by Jennifer Crocker at Ohio State University and published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. When a person's sense of worth is entirely contingent on external performance, every evaluation becomes existentially threatening. Not just a test of their work, a test of whether they deserve to exist.
So, what do you do if you recognize yourself in this? The first lesson comes from research by Neff at the University of Texas at Austin, published in Self and Identity in 2003. Self-compassion is the evidence-based antidote to perfectionism, not self-esteem, self-compassion. The difference is important. Self-esteem says, I am good because I performed well. Self-compassion says, I am worthy even when I did not. Neff's research found that people who practiced self-compassion showed significantly lower levels of perfectionism, depression, and anxiety, and significantly higher levels of motivation and resilience. The second lesson is to separate your performance from your worth. Your work can be imperfect, and you can still be enough. These are not the same thing, and treating them as if they are is the core cognitive distortion at the heart of perfectionism. The third lesson is what researcher Brené Brown at the University of Houston calls embracing good enough. Not as settling, not as giving up on quality, but as recognizing that done and imperfect serves the world far better than perfect and never finished. The perfectionist's greatest fear is that without the pursuit of perfection, they will become mediocre. Research suggests the opposite is true. Freedom from perfectionism is what allows genuine excellence to emerge.
The question this video started with was, what if you never felt good enough? Here is what the research actually shows. The feeling of never being good enough is not evidence that you are not good enough. It is evidence that somewhere along the way, you learned to tie your worth to your performance. And that is a lesson that can be unlearned. Not easily, not quickly, but with the same dedication you have been bringing to every project, every goal, every standard you have ever set for yourself. Psychologist Dweck at Stanford University, whose research on growth mindset was published in her 2006 book, Mindset, found that the belief that you are a fixed quantity to be judged is itself the problem. You are not a finished product awaiting evaluation. You are a process, and processes do not have to be perfect to be worth continuing. If this changed how you think about the voice that tells you it is still not enough, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to MindShadow for a new psychology story every week. And tell me in the comments, what is the standard you have been holding yourself to that you are ready to let go of? I'll see you in the next one.